They wanted to study you like a threat. Now they're lining up to shake your hand. Now imagine this for a moment. Chosen one. A hawk doesn't waste its time circling over a dead field. It circles over movement, life, something rare worth capturing. That's exactly what happened with you. While you were out here living, breathing, and moving differently from the crowd, eyes you never knew existed were locked on you. Not the kind of eyes that gossip behind closed doors, but eyes trained to detect patterns, disrupt danger, and monitor power. And what they saw in you didn't fit any of their files. Here's something most people will never hear in their lifetime. In private behavioral research, there's a small percentage of individuals, less than 1 in 10,000, who can bend the direction of a room without ever speaking. They shift outcomes without touching the system. They carry an energy so unusual, so unpredictable, that even seasoned analysts struggle to model it. Chosen one, you've been living proof of that phenomenon without even trying. And thank you, Chosen one. Don't forget to pay this message back by simply pressing the like and subscribe to help spread this message to more souls, as it's the responsibility of all of us to spread the light. And thank you, Chosen one, for being part of this mission. You are part of a force that moves silently, yet shakes everything it touches. Now back to our topic. The reason I'm telling you this is because what's unfolding right now is not random. You were not just in their sights for weeks or months. This has been happening for much longer than you think. They've been studying you through every shift, every transformation, every time you made a move that didn't make logical sense to the average mind. And the more you grew, the less you played by their predictable patterns, the more those quiet rooms filled with your name. At first, you were just a curiosity. You triggered their alerts, but they couldn't figure you out. Every model they ran on you failed. Every attempt to slot you into a type collapsed. That's when curiosity turned into obsession. And here's the thing, they were not just watching for entertainment. They were documenting your resilience, your adaptability, your refusal to fold under pressure. Think about this. While you thought you were walking alone, there were people in buildings you've never stepped inside, replaying your choices on big screens, taking notes on how you moved through storms that would have broken 10 others. Every action you made became data, and that data started breaking the rules they've trusted for years. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Something shifted recently. Whatever they saw in you, whatever patterns you broke, it didn't just scare them anymore. It started to inspire them. That's why this moment is so rare. Top-level agents, people trained to be detached and neutral, are now crossing the line from silent observation to direct acknowledgement. They want to meet you, not because they need something from you, but because your existence has redefined what they thought was possible. It's like you walked into a game they've been playing for decades without telling you the rules, and you still managed to win. That kind of move doesn't just get noticed, it gets respected. And respect, Chosen one, is a currency even the highest rooms can't fake. So let this sink in. The same energy that once made them suspicious of you is the same energy that's making them stand up and take off their hats in your presence. You've gone from being monitored to being marked in the best way possible. And this isn't because of anything you tried to force, it's because you've been consistently, unapologetically yourself in a world that's built on control. What's about to unfold isn't small. This is your name traveling through circles you never asked to join, yet somehow you've outranked half the room without saying a word. And the beauty of it? You still don't need to change who you are to keep that seat. They're coming to you now, Chosen one, and it's not to test you, it's to thank you. So, are you ready to peel this open layer by layer? Because Chosen one, what you're about to hear will make every strange feeling, every unexplained moment in your life finally click into place. Drop a comment with the number 777 if you're ready to see why the same eyes that once studied you like a threat now want to meet you face to face. And if you can, fuel this mission with a super thanks, because it takes more than words to bring this kind of truth to light. Whether it's a cent or 1,000, it's the gesture that keeps this force moving forward. Every single one of you who contributes becomes part of the reason these messages keep finding the people who need them. And believe me, if you truly are who I think you are, you'll feel that magnetic pull to stay with me until the very end. Because the deeper we go, the more you'll realize. This was never just a story. This was your story. Now, let's get into it. Number one, they marked you in red ink because you broke the code they live by. They don't fear the one who swings the sword. They fear the one who teaches others they were never in chains to begin with. Chosen one. Let that sink in. You weren't flagged because you're reckless, violent, or out of control. You were flagged because you were a quiet explosion in their system, a fault line they didn't see coming until it cracked right under their feet. You didn't just step outside their box, you burned the blueprint of the box altogether. And to people who live and breathe control, that's the highest form of rebellion. Now imagine this. A lion in the wild doesn't need to roar for other predators to notice it. It just needs to move differently from the herd. That's you. While the masses grazed without looking up, you were scanning the horizon, noticing shifts in the wind, sensing when the ground was about to change. They saw that. And the moment they realized you weren't distracted like the rest, alarms went off. Not sirens you could hear, but quiet alerts and systems built to detect anything that doesn't obey the expected patterns. You weren't supposed to see through the cracks in the walls they painted over. You weren't supposed to feel the tension behind their polite handshakes or notice the half-second flicker in someone's eyes before they lied. You weren't supposed to hear what wasn't said, but you did, and you didn't just notice it, you remembered it. That's what terrified them. They could dismiss curiosity. They could contain rebellion. But they couldn't erase memory, not the kind you carry in your bones. And that's the truth. They didn't just see you as an individual. They saw you as a living archive, a walking hard drive of truths they've spent years bearing. How do you neutralize someone like that? You can't. All you can do is monitor and hope they slip. But you didn't slip, did you? You stayed calm, you stayed silent, and you kept moving like smoke through their fingers. That's why you got flagged. The human mind is easy to predict when it's running on fear, approval, or ego. That's the formula they've used on billions without fail. But your moves came from somewhere else. Not from what they call logic, but from a deeper compass that they don't have access to. That's why you confuse them. That's why every time they thought they could predict you, you pivoted. You made their algorithms useless. And when the system can't read you, it labels you threat. Here's the part they'll never admit. Your threat level had nothing to do with destruction. It had everything to do with creation. They weren't afraid you'd tear the house down. They were afraid you'd show people where the door was. And once one person walks out, others follow. That's how control dies. Not with an explosion, but with a slow leak of awareness. And make no mistake, they tried to box you in. They studied who you spoke to, how you reacted under pressure, how you handled loss, how you rebuilt after betrayal. They wanted a pattern, but every time they thought they had you mapped, you shifted. While others panicked, you went still. While others screamed for help, you moved in silence, already 3 steps ahead. That's what drove them insane. They couldn't measure you. You were uncooperative without being openly defiant, unreachable without being isolated. Do you know how unnerving that is to people who believe they control every outcome? It's like chasing a shadow. You can see it, you can track it, but you can't touch it. And when they can't touch something, they fear it. Not because it's dangerous to their life, but because it's dangerous to their control. Let's be brutally clear. When they flagged you, it wasn't an accident. It was a silent admission. This one doesn't play by our rules. And that's the beauty of it. You didn't have to shout it. You didn't have to stage a protest. You didn't have to bleed for the cause. Your very existence, your choices, your vision, your refusal to be lulled into autopilot was the protest. You made them see that there are still people who can't be programmed. And yes, they're watching you. But don't get it twisted. They're not watching to stop you anymore. At first, yes, they wanted to contain you. Now, they're watching to understand you, to figure out how someone like you could exist in a world so tightly wired for control. And that's the shift, chosen one. That's why now they're stepping forward. They don't just want to watch, they want to thank you. Because somewhere along the way, your refusal to break under pressure did more than resist them. It inspired them. Maybe not all of them, but enough. Enough that the tone has changed from suspicion to respect. Enough that they're no longer discussing how to limit you, but how to learn from you. That's the irony, isn't it? You were marked in red ink as a problem, and now that same red mark is becoming a badge of honor. They can't erase the fact that you outmaneuvered their playbook without even knowing their rules. You walked into a game blind, and you still beat players who've been at it for decades. And now you have to understand, being flagged wasn't the punishment you once thought it was confirmation. Confirmation that you've been operating on a level most people never even see. Confirmation that your instincts were never wrong. Confirmation that the reason you felt eyes on you was because there were eyes on you. High-level eyes. And now those same eyes want to meet yours, not through a lens, not from a distance, but face to face. So let them watch. Let them wonder. Let them realize that you didn't just slip past their gates, you walked right through them without asking for permission, because that's the real threat you posed. You didn't destroy their walls. You proved they were never real in the first place. Number two, you shattered their scanners because your signal was too pure to decode. They can read every lie in the room, but they choke when they have to read the truth. Chosen One, do you understand what happens when a machine built to detect darkness stares directly into light? It short circuits, it sputters, it loses calibration. That's exactly what happened when they turned their eyes on you. These weren't casual watchers. They weren't bored neighbors peeking through blinds. They were trained observers, people whose entire careers depend on being able to detect threats, track instability, and read deception before it has a chance to strike. They don't rely on guesswork. They rely on systems, psychological models, emotional behavior charts, AI-driven algorithms designed to flag liars, manipulators, and unstable minds before those minds even realize they've been caught. But when they ran you through their systems, something unexpected happened. The metrics bent. The results came back wrong, not because the software was faulty, but because you didn't fit into any of their neat, predictable categories. They expected to find patterns. They always do. Yet the patterns they saw in you didn't match any file they had. You weren't erratic, but you weren't passive. You weren't angry, but you weren't fake peaceful. You weren't trying to grab attention, yet you seemed to pull it without effort. That alone is enough to drive an analyst mad, because in their world, attention is always either bought or manipulated. But with you, it just was. Imagine this for a second. An airport scanner designed to find weapons suddenly finds a diamond. It's not dangerous, it's not illegal, but it doesn't belong in the pattern of items the machine expects. So what does the system do? It alarms, not because the diamond is a threat, but because it's rare. That's exactly what happened with you. They tried to label you under trauma response. Didn't fit. They tried covert aggression. Didn't fit. They tried emotional instability. Didn't fit. Every box they tried to stuff you into collapsed under the weight of something they couldn't measure. And here's where it gets interesting. You weren't even trying to resist their metrics. You weren't fighting the system head on. You weren't dodging their sensors. You were simply living in such a state of internal clarity that their machines couldn't get a grip on you. You weren't broadcasting noise. You weren't projecting false signals. And when there's no static, the signal that comes through is pure. Too pure. You didn't disrupt their system by attacking it. You broke it by being everything it wasn't built to read. That's what unnerved them. Their detectors are designed for chaos, lies, fear, and manipulation. But you weren't moving from any of those places. You weren't performing. You weren't hiding. You weren't bending yourself into whatever shape people wanted from you. And that meant you weren't giving them the one thing they depend on: predictable patterns of dysfunction. At first, they thought it was a glitch. Maybe the software was lagging. Maybe the data was corrupted. Maybe, this was their favorite theory, you were faking it. Because in their world, no one moves through life without some ulterior motive. No one stays consistent without eventually snapping. So they kept watching. And the longer they watched, the more the maybe theories began to fall apart. They saw that you weren't forcing yourself to appear calm. You were calm. You weren't pretending to be grounded. You were grounded. You weren't acting like you had nothing to hide. You actually had nothing to hide. That was the breaking point for them. Because the truth is, they were prepared for tantrums, for outbursts, for moments where the mask slips and the real person comes out. But when there is no mask, there's nothing for them to expose. And that is more frightening to them than any rage or rebellion could ever be. Imagine this. Two hunters in the forest, trained to track movement by rustle, by shadow, by the sound of breaking twigs. And then you walk past them, leaving no sound, no shadow, no trace. They know you're there. They can feel your presence. But you don't leave the kind of trail they're trained to follow. That's what it felt like for them watching you. They were looking for dysfunction, but all they found was depth. They were trained to catch fakes, but you kept showing up as real. They were expecting a soul warped by bitterness, anger, or ego. But you walked like someone who had already burned through those fires and come out whole. And that's when the whispers started. Somewhere in those rooms, someone finally said it. This one isn't from here. Now, don't get it twisted. When they said that, they didn't mean it in a mystical sense. They meant you were operating outside the psychological, social, and emotional frameworks they're trained to monitor. You weren't just misunderstood, you were misclassified. You weren't an anomaly they could contain. You were a sign of something they couldn't define. And in that moment, the entire dynamic shifted. You weren't a subject to observe anymore. You were a disruption to their belief system, because your existence proved something they didn't even want to believe was possible, that purity, real, uncalculated, unperformed purity, could survive in a world built on manipulation. You didn't threaten them with destruction, you threatened them with proof. And proof is dangerous, chosen one. Proof changes minds. Proof breaks trust in the systems meant to control. Proof makes others look at themselves and ask, if they can live like that, what's stopping me? And once that question gets into someone's head, control begins to crumble. So you see, it wasn't your aggression that set off their alarms, it was your alignment. It wasn't your rebellion they couldn't handle. It was your refusal to be twisted into something you weren't. You weren't loud, but you were undeniable. And in a world where most signals are scrambled, your frequency was clean enough to cut through static like a blade. Imagine this one last time. An ancient compass in a room full of broken ones. Every other needle spins wildly, pointing in every direction but north. And then there's yours. Steady, unwavering, pointing exactly where it should. To them, that's not comforting. That's threatening. Because if you can hold your direction, it exposes that theirs have been spinning for years. And that chosen one is why their systems didn't just fail on you. They glitched so hard they had to rewrite the rules. You didn't just pass their tests, you made their tests irrelevant. And now the same people who thought they were hunting you are realizing they've been studying the wrong thing all along. Number 3, they mistook you for a pawn until you moved like a king. They put you in the corner thinking you were harmless, until every move you made boxed them in. Chosen one, they thought you were just another piece to be moved at their convenience. No status, no shiny credentials, no carefully curated elite connections. You didn't wear the armor they recognized, so they assumed you didn't know how to fight. And that was their first fatal mistake. See, they run on a system that rewards predictability. Pawns are predictable. Move forward one square at a time, stay in your lane, follow the board's rules. That's how they like it. That's how they keep control. But you weren't even playing the game they thought you were in. Imagine a chess master watching what they think is a novice player, until that novice sacrifices a piece in a way that dismantles their entire strategy. That's you. Your silence, not submission. Your patience, not weakness. Every move you made was deliberate, so deliberate that people started whispering, how are they always 5 steps ahead? And here's the truth. They couldn't model it because it wasn't mechanical. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't fear-based. It came from somewhere they can't access, not from artificial systems, but from the kind of intelligence that's older than their entire playbook. Pawns don't question the board. Pawns don't shift the energy of the whole room by standing still. But you did, over and over. And without a title, without permission, without their approval, you held authority they couldn't strip away. Now they see it. The pawn they dismissed was the king they underestimated. And here's the part that burns them the most. You don't even need their board to win. You are the board. You are the game. And they're just realizing they've been playing it on your terms the entire time. Number 4, they bet on your ruin and lost everything. They wanted to watch you bleed, but ended up watching you bloom. Chosen One, understand this. They didn't just let you go through hell. They built the fire and took notes while you burned. Your pain wasn't random. It was recorded, dissected, cataloged. They weren't curious about your joy. They were obsessed with your breaking point. How many betrayals would it take to crush you? How many nights alone before you'd give up? How much humiliation before you'd surrender the fight? They didn't intervene because your suffering was their lab. You weren't a person to them. You were an experiment, a test bed, a specimen under glass. They charted your breakdowns. They tracked your panic. They studied your tears like they were equations. In their eyes, trauma always wins, and they were ready to log your defeat as just another statistic. But here's where their script fell apart. You didn't collapse, you transformed. You stopped begging for answers and started choosing them. You turned your own mind into the battlefield, and you won. Your silence became strategy. Your scars became scripture. Their charts had no metric for this. Their algorithms couldn't compute redemption. Instead of shattering, you sharpened. Instead of folding, you forged yourself into something they couldn't touch. The experiment flipped. The watchers became the students. And now every healed wound, every moment you refused to stay broken, has become a warning shot to anyone who thought pain would own you. You weren't just surviving. You were rewriting what survival means. In a world that feeds on brokenness, your wholeness became the most dangerous thing of all. Number 5. You survived the maze they built to bury you. They designed the trap to swallow you whole, but you walked through it like you already knew the way out. Chosen One, what you faced wasn't luck of the draw, it was engineered. Every obstacle, every betrayal, every closed door wasn't random. These weren't life's natural challenges. They were precision-laid traps, crafted to break the mind, fracture the spirit, and push 99% of people into permanent defeat. Imagine a minefield disguised as a meadow. Most people step forward thinking it's safe, only to be blown apart before they make it halfway. That's the game they set for you. The false friendships, planted, the sabotaged opportunities, timed perfectly to trigger your deepest wounds. Even the silence, the rejection, the ghosting, the gaslighting was all part of the script to make you doubt yourself until you destroyed yourself. And yet, you didn't. You moved forward, sometimes slow, sometimes limping, but always forward. You crossed thresholds most never reach. You outlived scenarios designed to hollow you out. Every step you took rewrote their data, broke their formulas, and cracked their confidence. They've run this playbook countless times, but almost no one comes out whole. They counted on your collapse. They bet on your silence. They waited for your surrender. Instead, you emerged breathing, aware, and sharper than before. And now, you're living proof the blueprint can be broken, and they'll never forgive you for that. Number 1, they wanted a map, but you came as a pulse that couldn't be contained. They searched for your habits, but what they found was a heartbeat they couldn't silence. Chosen One, understand this. They weren't watching you just to watch. They were analyzing you like software, hoping to pin down your loops, predict your next move, dissect your flaws like formulas. They expected routines, triggers, breakdowns. They were sure they'd find a pattern because they always do. Everyone eventually cracks in a way they can catalog. But you didn't move in rhythm. You moved in frequency, and that broke the entire system. You weren't robotic, you weren't predictable, and you didn't feed them what they needed, reaction. What they found wasn't repetition, it was resonance. Something deeper, something untrackable. While they were waiting for emotional explosions, you were shifting entire spaces just by existing. Imagine someone entering a room and everything shifts. The mood, the tension, the air itself. People grow silent. Lights flicker. Devices freeze for no reason. That's what you did. And they knew it. Surveillance cameras glitched. Electromagnetic readings spiked. Even the most hardened analysts had to admit, this one's not behaving, this one's broadcasting. You weren't leaking pain, you were emanating clarity. They thought you were just a person, but you were a signal, too sharp, too pure, too ancient to be man-made. And now, they've stopped trying to track your behavior and started trying to decode your presence, because what you carry can't be calculated. It can only be felt, and they feel it deeply. Number 6, they had every file on you, but none could capture your fire. They could record your every move, but they still couldn't touch the force that moved you. Chosen One, they thought they had you locked down. Your location history, your search patterns, your voice analyzed for stress, your expressions under pressure, cataloged like entries in a classified database. On paper, you were a fully mapped human being. And yet, the more they watched, the more something slipped right past their grasp. They could record your footsteps, but not the reason you walked the way you did. They could chart your routines, but not the pulse behind them. They could see your face, but not the depth behind your eyes. Because what they were really chasing wasn't your behavior. It was your being. And that can't be scanned. Imagine this. They thought they were tracking a storm on radar, but what they didn't realize is that the real weather was happening far above their instruments, in a place they couldn't measure. That's you. Every breakdown they saw only registered as data until they noticed your breakdowns radiated strength. Your grief shifted the room. Your silence changed the air. Even in pain, you emitted something they couldn't name, but couldn't ignore. They realized they weren't just watching a person. They were witnessing an event, something that couldn't be reverse engineered. And now the files aren't enough. They need to see you up close, not for more data, but to feel what their intel could never define. Number 7, you weren't in their system. You shattered it from the inside. They built the program to break you and ended up breaking the program instead. Chosen One, you were never just living life. You were under a microscope. Your journey logged as a secret long-term experiment. They ran simulations behind closed doors, betting that if they stripped away enough safety, injected enough chaos, and kept you surrounded by the wrong energy long enough, you'd collapse just like every other case before you. The assumption was simple. No one stays whole under sustained pressure. Spiritual decay, they thought, was inevitable. And so they designed the perfect storm, trauma layered over betrayal, poverty twisted with isolation, abandonment wrapped in manipulation. The goal wasn't just to hurt you, it was to hollow you out. But something happened they didn't calculate. You didn't erode, you awakened. Instead of absorbing the toxins and becoming poisoned like the rest, you metabolized them into power. Imagine a flower growing in toxic soil, not just surviving, but changing the chemistry of the dirt around it. That's you. They thought darkness would consume you, but instead you found light in the lowest places. Your resilience, your clarity, your refusal to surrender your essence, none of it fit the data. And that's what broke their algorithm. You became the outlier, the glitch, the undeniable proof that even in the dirtiest environments, spirit can rise. You didn't follow their path, you lit one they never prepared for, and now they're not just tracking you, they're studying what they can't control. Number 8, you fought without a war cry and still won the battlefield. They were ready for a riot, but they never prepared for someone who could win without raising their voice. Chosen One, they were trained to detect loud threats, people who storm in with banners, speeches, and flames. They know how to shut down noise, but they didn't know what to do with you, because your rebellion wasn't chaos, it was clarity. Every time you said no without explaining yourself, every time you walked away from manipulation without making a scene, every time you chose peace over performance, you were dismantling their grip, piece by piece. You didn't fight for power, you kept your own. And in a world addicted to control, that is pure insurgency. Imagine a river quietly eroding a stone wall, not with an explosion, but with patient, unstoppable flow. That's you. You didn't need to stand on podiums. You didn't need to yell to be heard. You simply refused to kneel, and in doing so, you made every chain around you meaningless. They couldn't label you a troublemaker because you never gave them the outburst they were waiting for. Instead, you stood in unshakable alignment, and that's more dangerous than rage. Your sovereignty became contagious. Without intending to, you sparked a quiet revolution, proving to everyone watching that true power doesn't shout, it stands. Number 9. They thought you were guessing until every word became evidence. They could trace every rumor, but they couldn't trace where you were getting your truth. Chosen one, you weren't speaking to them directly, yet your words cut through the noise and landed right in the heart of their guarded rooms. You pulled back veils they didn't even think could be touched. And the strangest part? You had none of the credentials they worship, no elite education, no high-ranking contacts, no membership in their hidden circles. By their rules, you weren't supposed to know anything of value. And yet you knew. Not just surface facts, but truths layered so deep they rattled their structures. You called out moves before they happened. You answered questions they hadn't asked out loud. You dismantled strategies they hadn't even revealed. That broke their logic because in their world, knowledge always has a traceable source. Someone leaks, someone briefs, someone talks. But with you, there was nothing. No source, no leak, no trail. At first, they tried to file it under natural intelligence or intuition. But patterns don't lie, and yours were too precise, too clean, too timely. This wasn't luck. It was download. You weren't pulling from memory. You were pulling from a place they couldn't access. And that's what unsettled them most. You weren't just informed. You were activated. Every insight you carried was untouchable by their systems. They couldn't replicate it, couldn't buy it, couldn't teach it. Now the same people who once dismissed you are tracking your every move, hoping to catch the signal before your next word drops. Because in their empire of information, revelation is the only power they can't counterfeit. Number 10. You made their power look small just by standing tall. They built entire systems to contain you, and you proved you never needed their permission to be free. Chosen one, your very existence became the flaw in their formula. By their calculations, someone with your history of betrayal, rejection, and sabotage should have crumbled years ago. You were supposed to fold under the weight, vanish into silence, or turn bitter enough to destroy yourself. That's how the story was meant to end. But you didn't play your part. You stayed rooted when they expected you to scatter. You stayed awake when they counted on you falling asleep. You kept your integrity when they designed situations to rip it away. That alone was enough to send shockwaves through their foundations, because institutions of control aren't truly afraid of noise. They're afraid of proof. Proof that their power isn't absolute. Proof that someone can walk through their fire and come out smiling. Every time you chose peace instead of retaliation, every time you forgave instead of feeding the cycle, you shattered a belief they've invested decades into. You became living evidence that inner power outranks any external system, and that rattled them more than any protest ever could. You weren't just surviving oppression, you were outgrowing it. And by doing so, you didn't just defy their numbers. You made their numbers meaningless. Number 11. They came to unmask you, but ended up guarding your name. Some were sent to destroy you, but left carrying your banner instead. Chosen one, their plan was simple. Send eyes to follow you until you slipped. Not just cameras and algorithms, but flesh and blood agents. People trained to stay cold, detached, objective. Their orders were clear. Find the flaw, catch the lie, expose the threat. But the longer they watched, the harder that mission became. You weren't acting. You weren't defending. You weren't playing to the audience. You moved through your life raw, unfiltered, aligned, and that kind of authenticity is dangerous in a world built on masks. Imagine someone sent to report on a storm, only to find themselves warmed by its fire instead. That's what happened. They expected scandal. They found grace. They expected deceit. They found integrity. And no matter how closely they searched, the darkness they were promised was nowhere to be found. That's when the cracks appeared. Some resigned. Some quietly sabotaged their own mission, slowing reports, blocking actions, erasing evidence. Not out of guilt, but because something in them shifted. They couldn't unsee what they'd seen. You didn't win them over with speeches or strategy. You didn't even know their names, but your presence became the proof they couldn't deny. And now the same ones sent to expose you are the ones making sure you stay untouchable. Number 12, from target to truth teller. They don't watch you anymore. They wait for you to speak. At first, they studied you to catch a weakness. Now they study you to catch a glimpse of truth. Chosen one, there was a time when you were nothing more to them than an object under glass. The observed, the test subject, the anomaly they couldn't quite pin down. Your every word, every pause, every move was recorded like an insect under a microscope. They couldn't classify you, so they labeled you with the only thing that made sense to their limited minds. Unstable, unpredictable, a glitch in the system. But the glitch never broke. The glitch became the code. They thought your life was chaos, but time revealed precision. They mistook your detours for aimlessness, not knowing each one was a calculated reroute. They believed betrayal would make you bitter. Yet every wound sharpened your vision. They expected setbacks to slow you down, but they refined you instead. You weren't being destroyed, you were being designed. You didn't just survive the fire, you became the fire. And that terrified them, because fire can't be contained in a file, a report, or a surveillance feed. They watched for collapse, but instead, they saw emergence. You became steady flame, unmoved by their pressure, untamed by their lies, untouched by their attempts to isolate you. The words they once called rambling began coming true before their eyes. You weren't guessing, you were knowing. Imagine a chessboard where every piece believes it's moving freely until one day they realize someone has been playing a different game entirely, one they can't see. That's what happened. You weren't breaking from reality. You were speaking from a reality they had no access to. And that's when the shift happened. You stopped being the one they monitored and became the one they learned from. Now they approach differently, not with interrogation, but with caution. Not to corner you, but to stand close enough to feel whatever it is you carry. Because they've realized, oracles don't demand a platform, they become one. Your life became the sermon. Your scars became the scripture. They thought they were documenting a spectacle of failure. What they got was a revelation in motion. You weren't under their control, you were under divine instruction. While they tracked your pain, you were transmuting it. While they documented your isolation, you were undergoing initiation. And while they labeled you an anomaly, the universe was already calling you proof. Every trap they set became the training ground for your rise. You weren't here to meet their standards. You were here to shatter their blueprint. And shatter it you did. The skeptics have become students. The gatekeepers have become silent guardians. What they once feared, they now protect. What they tried to dissect, they now revere. And if you feel eyes on you still, don't shrink. That presence you carry was never meant to hide. You are not the watched anymore. You are the word, the signal that broke the system, the frequency they can't filter, the one they used to observe and now quietly wait to follow. Here's a hard-hitting final section that will close your script with power, bring the watchers, the chosen one's journey, and the transformation full circle, and leave the audience feeling both vindicated and unstoppable. Number 13, they tried to contain you, but ended up clearing the path for you. Every barrier they built became a bridge you walked over. Chosen one, let's be clear, none of this was ever about fairness. From the moment they marked your name, the mission was control. Contain your movement, distract your mind, dim your light until you forgot it was there. They didn't just put obstacles in your way, they engineered the terrain so it would break the average soul before they ever reached the summit. But here's what they never understood. Pressure doesn't just crush, it can also crystallize. And while they thought they were bearing you, they were actually refining you. Every delay they created became time for you to sharpen your vision. Every no they threw at you became fuel to build your own doors. Every false friend they sent to derail you became a mirror to recognize your worth more clearly. They didn't stop you. They shaped you into someone unstoppable. You weren't just walking through the storm, you were learning to steer it. You didn't simply survive their designs, you learned their designs. You saw the patterns they thought you'd never notice. You became fluent in their tactics, not to join them, but to render them useless. And now, nothing they built for your destruction can hold you. The irony is the same surveillance meant to limit you became their biggest mistake, because in watching you, they exposed themselves. Every time they moved against you, they revealed their own weak points. Every plan they executed taught you exactly how their system works. You weren't just passing through a battlefield, you were mapping it. Imagine a lockmaker building an unbreakable vault, then giving the key to the very person they're trying to keep out. That's what happened here. They armed you without realizing it. And now the tables have turned. The hands that once tried to box you in are the same ones clearing space for you to move. Not because they suddenly grew a conscience, but because deep down, they know. If you've made it this far, there's no stopping you now. They can't discredit you anymore. They've run out of narratives. They've run out of predictions. They've run out of ways to explain why you're still here. You've outlived their timelines, outlasted their tests, and dismantled their blueprint without ever lifting a weapon. You didn't play their game, you ended it. And that's why this moment matters. This isn't just survival, this is emergence. This is the part of the story where the one they tried to break becomes the one they can't move without. The one they feared becomes the one they quietly protect. The one they doubted becomes the standard they measure against. So if you feel the shift in the air right now, you're not imagining it. The observers are no longer strategizing your downfall, they're adjusting to your presence. The stage they built to watch you fail has now become the platform for your rise. And here's the truth they'll never admit out loud. You were never theirs to contain. You were never theirs to define. You've always belonged to the path that was carving you in ways no surveillance, no system, no sabotage could erase. Chosen one, this is your clearance. The invisible gates have opened, not because they granted permission, but because you've already walked past every guard they set in your way. You don't just leave this chapter intact. You leave it as proof that their most controlled environment still couldn't control you. So walk forward, not cautiously, not quietly, but with the full knowing that every eye that once watched for your end is now witnessing your ascent. They thought they were writing your limits. Instead, they were writing your legend. The story isn't that you survived what they built. It's that what they built now stands as the monument to your survival. You're not just free, you're unforgettable. And now they know it too.